Love is not destructive. Love is not about an object outside of yourself. Love is not about holding somebody against their will. I think of love as a freeing power, that if you love someone, you love them so much that you want them to go out in the world and be the best they can be. You're not constantly checking and saying, where are you, where are you going, who are you with, when are you coming back, why weren't you here? You know, there's a phone call on your voicemail that I checked and you said you were going to be here, but you were really there. I mean, this is a very desperate way of relating to somebody. So that kind of love is kind of a pathological or dangerous love. And I would venture to say that love addicts don't really know what a solid adult form of love feels like. So a lot of these things can sound like perfectly healthy love. You know, like being dependent on someone you love to take care of you is not that horrible of a thing. But if you can't function because that person is not around, then it becomes problematic. So people that are love addicts have to start to look at their own codependency issues, the ways in which they use other people to prop themselves up in the world. So they have to go through a recovery process where they scrupulously look at all of their injuries from their childhood, how they got to where they are, how they learned to organize themselves around other people. You know, there are people that will tell you that they will always do what they have to do to make sure other people are happy first, and they don't have any consideration for their own needs and wants because they're so desperate to be loved and liked. And again, on the one hand, that's really makes for someone who's very conscientious and kind, but if they're victimizing themselves or they're persecuting themselves, then it doesn't really do anybody any good. And dopamine is the hormone that makes us feel really good. So it's the feeling we get in our bodies when we're super excited or when kids experience Christmas morning. And that kind of excitement is a high. And people that often feel dull in their bodies, if they're chronically depressed or they don't feel loved, are going to be looking for that high because it makes them feel good. So the locus of control is outside of themselves. They need someone else to make them feel like they're loved, like they're valid, like there's some meaning in their life. Many love addicts, as I said earlier, will go for the drama, the intensity. They confuse passion with intensity. So if it feels really, really intense, they think, oh my God, I'm super in love and this is beyond anything I could have imagined. And that can be exhausting neurobiologically because they're running all of these chemicals in their brains and bodies. And after about 3 months, it sort of dries up. And then they find themselves starting to, you know, either create more drama within the relationship or start looking around outside of the relationship. It makes them feel excited, it makes them feel alive, they feel loved, they can feel sexy, they can feel like they have some meaning in their life when their lives can often feel empty, meaningless, they can feel unlovable, or that they have no direction in their lives. I mean, you hear people say sometimes that, you know, my life is meaningless or it's worthless unless I'm in a relationship with somebody. Love addicts are, you know, basic people. They're your neighbors and your teachers and your bankers. But it means that, you know, they probably or most likely had a hard time growing up where they didn't feel particularly lovable or cared for. And so they're seeking that validation chronically outside of themselves. Well, if you take the case of somebody who wasn't terribly abused, either physically, sexually, or psychologically, but a child that grew up in a family that was either rigidly disengaged or somewhat chaotic, or they were just kind of neglected in a benign way, that child may start to feel dull internally, kind of chronically, like in a chronic low-grade depression, or perhaps they feel anxious because they don't have somebody around them, an adult around them, to kind of help soothe their nervous system, tell them that things are going to be okay, the kind of things that good enough parents do. And so that child can start to form their own fantasy world of pretend that, you know, someday my prince will come, or someday somebody will rescue me, or someday I'll find a woman that loves me more than anybody and won't leave me. as those people grow up, they're going to start to seek people that are going to provide those needs for them. So I had, for example, a client tell me once that he was abandoned by his family very early on, as a teenager really, and left alone in his house to fend for himself. And he went to school and he had friends, but the adults weren't really around very much. They were working. And so by the time he was 22, he met and married a woman. And he wasn't really in love with her, but he knew that she loved him and that she would never leave him. He felt safe with her. And so he had a neediness for her, not a real adult desire and need for, but it was coming from a place of sort of a small childlike place. And after about 20 years of marriage, he realized that he never really had loved her. They'd raised a family together and they had two, teenage boys, and there was nothing really wrong in the marriage other than it was kind of dead inside. And he had gotten exactly what he wanted, somebody who was steadfast, loved him, took care of him, cooked for him, but never left. And he realized it was unfair to her and unfair to him through his own recovery process. So that's one example. Other examples can be much more dramatic, where there's constant drama being kicked up by way of having grown up in a family where the child was perhaps getting mixed messages of "I love you" and "go away." And this can happen if somebody has a borderline mother. A mother who is traumatized herself and who's either terrified of being engulfed so she can't have too much contact, or terrified of being abandoned. So she's often using the child to get her own needs met or pushing the child away because it's too much for her. And that creates somebody who is then going to be seeking that same kind of love relationship. Someone that's saying, "Come here, go away" at the same time. One of the things a love addict might do would be to, call somebody 10 times in a day. So if they call the person they're in love with and that person doesn't call them back immediately, they can start freaking out. And so they'll call back and they'll call again and again and again and call and hang up because their anxiety is so intense that they cannot contain it. So they're looking for another person to regulate them internally and make them feel better because they cannot regulate themselves. So initially, an example would be that that person would have to agree that they can only make one phone call to somebody and they have to wait until that person calls them back. And in the meantime, if they get so internally chaotic, they have to call somebody in their program, they have to reach out to a sponsor, perhaps they have to go to a meeting, they have to go for a walk, maybe they have to go to the gym and kind of move some of that energy around. They have to use self-talk measures to remind themselves that it's not the end of the world, they're not going to die, everything's going to be okay.